Hi, everyone. Welcome to 3GNY's Story Live, WEDU Wednesday. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Melissa Domash, 3GNY volunteer, and as of this month, a proud board member. I'm also the granddaughter of 2 Holocaust survivors. This is our 28th WEDU Wednesday, our virtual series that brings our educational initiative, WEDU, from classrooms to your living rooms. We are so glad to have you here for this special WEDU Wednesday program, and we look forward to having you join us for more in the future. 3GNY is an educational nonprofit for grandchildren of survivors and supporters. As a living link, we preserve the legacies and lessons of the Holocaust. Our mission is to educate diverse communities about the perils of intolerance and to provide a supportive forum for the descendants of survivors. We empower 3Gs to share their stories. For tonight's event, we'll be featuring 3GNY volunteer Aerin Kalmans, who will share the story of her great-grandmother, Naomi Kaplan Warren. Notice how I said great-grandmother. This is an extra special program, as Aerin is the first 4G we are featuring in our WEDU Wednesdays. We are so excited to highlight Aerin as a prime example of how this work truly transcends generations. Tonight's program showcases 3GNY's flagship educational initiative, WEDU, which is short for We Educate. WEDU is a 4-week training program that empowers grandchildren of survivors to learn and compellingly share their family's Holocaust experience in school classrooms and community groups. Education is more and more urgent than ever, given the horrifying rise of anti-Semitism we see in the headlines and in our communities on a daily basis. We know we need to keep doing this work as much as we possibly can. Studies have shown that those who receive Holocaust education are more tolerant and comfortable with people of different races and backgrounds. They're more willing to challenge incorrect or biased information and are more likely to be upstanders. Through our grandparents' testimony, we talk about the importance of stepping in early and often, where small injustices are found. Our stories provide a human face to the past and a living link to the present, and inspire our listeners to stand up to hatred and to act with courage and compassion. 3GNY has trained more than 500 speakers in New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia, and around the country. We've spoken in more than 1,200 classrooms and have impacted more than 50,000 students and community members. And between our live programming and YouTube channel, more than 18,000 additional people have heard our stories. Hope is not lost, and we need to keep doing this work, now more than ever. You can help us accomplish this through a financial gift. This will go directly towards engaging more speakers and schools, thus reaching even more students with these impactful stories. We do not solicit donations from schools, teachers, or students. We provide our programming to schools completely free in order to remove any barriers from connecting to students with more personal testimony from the Holocaust. There is a link with ways to donate in the chat, and we hope you'll consider making a gift. If you have contributed before, thank you so much. It is because of donors like you that we can educate students and the community about the lessons of the Holocaust through our family's personal stories. Thank you again for being here tonight. You're helping us honor the memories of our grandparents and ensuring that never again is more than just an empty phrase. I'd now like to call on Elliot Zellinger, 3GNY volunteer, who will introduce himself and then introduce Aerin.
Thank you, Alyssa. Hi, everyone. I'm Elliot Zellinger, grandchild of Sam and Ella Zellinger. I'm certified to tell my grandfather Sam's Holocaust survival story. He was the oldest of 9 children, survived the Holocaust. He grew up in Romania. Unfortunately, he lost his 5 youngest siblings in the war, but ultimately survived, moved to America, and allowed me to tell the story here tonight. I've known 3GNY for about a year. I found this group and immediately was attracted to its mission and have been a big part of growing the Long Island chapter where I live. It's now my pleasure to introduce to you Aerin Kalmans. Aerin is the great-granddaughter of Holocaust survivor Naomi Kaplan Warren, whom she affectionately knew as Nunu. Aerin completed 3GNY's WEDU speaker training in 2022. She feels so grateful that she knew her great-grandmother for 16 amazing years and was able to hear Nunu's story directly from her. It's Aerin's privilege to speak to students and keep Nunu's legacy alive. Aerin grew up in Houston, Texas, Bel Air to be exact, and has lived in New York City since 2022. She currently works in sustainable investing. She has a deep passion for storytelling and literature. She's also a proud Richmond Spider alumni, despite the fact that they lost the first round of the Atlantic 10 tournament. While Aerin is sharing, feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A feature in the Zoom menu. We'll have plenty of time for questions and discussion after Aerin's story. Aerin, take it away.
Thank you for that lighthearted introduction and the dig at the University of Richmond Spiders. We'll recover. Thank you, Elliot and Alyssa, for all of your work, and Dave as well. Thank you all for being here. I see we have over 100 participants, many of my family and friends, and many who I don't know, who are also volunteers with 3GNY. So I'm excited to share my Nunu story. Elliot kind of did my background for me, but the only thing I will add is that I'm going to give my presentation today as I would give to the students. So I might throw out some questions, not really answerable, but just to show you how I engage with the students. I have been fortunate. I haven't gone in person due to being in person for my job, but I have been fortunate enough during lunch or before or after work, been able to share my Nunu story as frequently as last week I spoke to a class in upstate New York in Syracuse, actually. So it's been a great way to get involved, and I'm very excited to share the story. Okay. Okay, awesome. So here is a photo of Nunu and me. I'm going to share the story of my great-grandmother, Naomi Warren. So Nunu was born on September 1st, 1920 in Volkovysk, which, as you see on this map, is Belarus. At the time was Poland, and she was born into a loving Jewish home. She had two older siblings who were much older than her, and she had two parents, and her grandparents lived in the town, and the town was around 18,000 people. So obviously growing up in Houston, maybe you're in New York, don't really know where you are, all of you today calling in, but 18,000, pretty small. So they were friends with a lot of their neighbors. It was a small, close-knit community. And I remember Nunu telling me that not all of her friends were Jewish. I think around like her class of 20 students, maybe 3 or 4 were Jewish. So she had lots of Jewish and non-Jewish friends. And growing up, she says she had a great childhood. Here is a family photo. And when I first saw this photo, I was like, which one are you? And she said, I'm the little boy looking one in the middle. And her older siblings are behind her, and then her parents on either side of her. So she remembers growing up being very spoiled for most of her life, as she was the youngest. And so she was at home as the oldest. I can't relate to that feeling, but maybe Tally feels so spoiled, my youngest sister. So she grew up, she played basketball. She was very athletic. She was very tall and had a lot of fun and was always very social, had lots of friends, and described her upbringing as being Jewish, but not going to temple every single week, but celebrating the holidays. And for work, her father was the president of the bank in town, which will play a part in her family's stature in the town. And when the war breaks out, her father has a microscope on him a little bit, as he is the president of the bank. And this was seen as a problem, not in so much as that he was Jewish, but more so that he was a capitalist. And that was a problem with, the Soviet Union and communism. So let's see. So this is a photo of some young men. The second from the right, I believe, is, if I'm correct, my family will drop it in the chat if I'm not. But I believe that's the correct one, is the second from the right is who she ends up marrying as a young woman. And that's a photo of her as a young woman. And so she remembers going to school, and she was about to go off to college in England. So she graduates from high school, she's ready to go to college, and she's in Warsaw on her birthday, September 1st, when the Nazis invade Poland. So she's getting her paperwork together, I assume, like at the embassy, getting her papers signed, ready to go off to school in the fall. So that fall in September, later that month. and the Nazis invade. So she's not in her hometown with her family at that time. She's in Warsaw. She has to figure out how to get home to Volkovysk. And I believe her brother, so I mentioned her older siblings weren't living at home. Her brother, I believe, was in Warsaw at the time. And so she, I believe, finds her brother and her brother's wife, and they somehow make their way back to Volkovysk. And something that when I was growing up as a child, I think the binary of the Holocaust, I think I got a little confused when the Nazis rolled in on September 1st, 1939. In my mind, that was like game over, no one leaves the house, like world ends as we know it. And I don't think it was that stark. Obviously, I think there was chaos and confusion and lots of different laws and, you know, wearing the Jewish star and can we go to class and can we go to school. But at this time, so I said she was supposed to go off to England. She doesn't go off to England for university. She goes to the local university in her town. And so she's still able to go to school for a little bit. And that's actually where she meets Alexander, her husband. And he is in medical school at the time. And she's in getting her undergraduate degree. And they meet and they fall in love during this time, right as all of this chaos is ensuing as the Nazis take over. Something else I want to mention is of her childhood, from what I recall her telling, there wasn't a lot of anti-Semitism in her town. I think it wasn't like all the Jews lived in one neighborhood and everyone else lived somewhere else. It was a very integrated community. But something she did share was that when she was on a train, so I assume maybe going to Warsaw with her family, she and her mother were on a train and there was another mother-daughter sitting somewhere else in the train, and the daughter was like crying, throwing a fit, and the mother like snapped at her. And to reprimand her daughter said, if you don't behave, I'm going to give you away to a Jew. And I think that was like her first memory of being like, oh my goodness, like people can say horrible anti-Semitic things. And that's just like such a crazy concept to me. That's never been something that's been said to me, thankfully. And so that was a little bit of context around anti-Semitism at the time in her perspective. So as I mentioned, the Nazis invade September 1st, 1939. That is her 19th birthday. So absolutely crazy. And so, as I mentioned, her father was the president of the bank and she married Alexander, who was a doctor. So she had a little bit of privilege, if you will. And so this is a photo of the house that she lived in. She was lived in at the time of the war. So from my understanding, a lot of people were sent to a ghetto, but she and her husband and her brother, who was also a doctor, and his wife, who was a dentist, or like a hygienist, were able to live in this house because the Nazis still needed doctors. So she was not gone to a ghetto. She was in this house, and her sister-in-law, who I mentioned was a hygienist, they used to fill cavities with gold. So her sister-in-law had a little bit of gold and was sewing gold into their clothing and trying to just like keep as much on them as they could. I don't really know much about what it was like for them living in this house at the time, but I can imagine serving Nazi soldiers and hearing stories of what's going on in a ghetto or what's going on with the war would be extremely chaotic and scary. Something also that I have been told is this really beautiful, lovely tree. This is the photo in the bottom corner is when my Nunu went back many years later. Obviously, as you can tell, she's much older, and she went back, and this was the tree that apparently when things got really bad, they said that they were going to bury maybe like photos or silver or gold, their prized possessions at this tree to come back for them so the Nazis wouldn't take it. And when they went back, my mom says that my uncle was like, maybe we should dig up the treasure at this tree. They did not, but this is a really lovely tree that probably holds some beautiful family heirlooms. So I said the war broke out September 1st, 1939. She's living in the ghetto until January 1943. 1943. Wanted to check my year on that. So that's a really long time to be living in that limbo stage and that limbo period. And they are transported to Auschwitz in this cattle car. At the time, they obviously had no idea where they were going. They don't know how long the journey lasted. They don't know how many days it was, but she said there were probably like 200 people crammed into this car, and there was no food, there was no water, there was no where to relieve yourself if you need the restroom. She said many people died, and you couldn't like sit down, you couldn't lay down, there were no windows, so you didn't know where you're going. It's also freezing, and they just had the clothes on their back and maybe a little suitcase. At this point, I usually ask the students where, if you're going on a trip and you're going somewhere, but you don't know where you're going, what do you think you're going to pack? And I get varied responses. But this comes into play in a little bit when I talk about her work at the camp in terms of what people pack. So she says they arrive at Auschwitz. I have 1942 here, but I believe I'm incorrect on that. I believe it's 1943, so don't trust my slides. Apologies. I shall fix that. But they arrive at Auschwitz. It's January. As someone who is from Houston, I cannot imagine the winter. Sounds absolutely unbearable. And she says when they arrived, it was just utter chaos. There was screaming, and no one really knew what was going on. And she could see that people were, shuffling around, guards were yelling. I also can imagine, growing up, there's all these people, you speak German, or you speak Polish, or you speak Yiddish, and all these people, there's, maybe people from Italy, all over, people speaking Italian, people speaking all sorts of languages, and you are expected to understand what the Germans are saying. So that's something I don't know if she spoke German, but I'm very curious how all of that kind of happened. But they're being pushed in one direction or the other, and she's obviously holding on to her mother, and she's with her sister-in-law and her brother and her husband. They're all, I believe, together, and they're separating by men and women. And so she sticks with her mother. At this point, 1943, she's what, 22 years old? I'm 23, so I still talk to my mother 27 times a day. I would be clinging to my mother in this moment. I can't imagine. And she and her mother were stuck together, and her mother, I think, realized like, oh shoot, like I'm a little bit of an older woman. I'm seeing that they're splitting people up, and kind of had the foresight to see that they were splitting older women and younger children into one line, and then people who were of an age to work. Obviously, she didn't know that at the time. And so she pushed my Nunu into the other line, and she says that she just saw her mother's sad gray eyes, and that was the last time she ever saw her mother. Her mother went to the gas chamber after that and passed at Auschwitz. So obviously horrific, so sad. And she sticks with her sister-in-law, and they are at Auschwitz in the barracks, and they go shower, tattoo, but obviously at this point they've heard about the showers, but they don't know, when they step in to take a shower, is this going to be gas or is this going to be actually water? They're given their uniform and assigned a job, and one of her jobs was working in Canada. And what is Canada, you might ask? It's the location where they separate the belongings of the people that brought things. So back to the question that I asked the students, what do you think people brought? Yes, people brought photos, people brought food, people brought clothing, shoes. So they were in charge of separating. And this was actually deemed a really good job because you were inside. And as I said, she arrived in January. So any outdoor work sounds horrible, miserable, probably much more likely to die, because you weren't fed anything besides turnip soup, she would say, and a piece of bread maybe, and some watered down coffee. And they would, work all day, rise before the sun. And so she worked in Canada, and she said that was a job that they were just like, sorting belongings. And so it was inside, it wasn't super heavy manual labor, but something that, I don't actually usually tell the students this, but we're all, probably of age here. that she said that, you know, they tried to make the best of every day and tried to make each other laugh and remember the good old times. And a lot of people actually brought alcohol. And so she says that they made the first White Russian with some vodka and condensed milk. So, you know, she said they got drunk, and I'm sure that was a really lovely time, and probably one of the only lovely times to be had. So that was her job, but it was a really, really horrible place. And she remembers that every day, you know, someone would say, I can't get up, I can't go to work. And the women would say, you have to, because if you don't get up and go to work, you will die. And one day her sister-in-law says this to her, she says, I can't go on anymore, I can't do this. And she's like, yes, you can. If you don't, they will kill you. You need to get up and go to work. I have to go to work, so I'm going, but you get up, please. And tried to like convince her to get up and go, and she couldn't. So she went to her job, because if she wasn't there on time, she would maybe be dead upon, you know, getting there late. And when she came back, her sister-in-law had been taken and was killed. So she says that her friends and her sister-in-law up until that point were the ones who kept her alive. And here's a photo of her tattoo. And here's a quote about friendship and how every day they just had to kind of live in a little bit of denial and, you know, try to go on every day and get up, because that was all there was. And if to accept the reality of what she was living would have meant death, and kind of processing it all. And I can't imagine, as such a culture as we are right now, talking about mental health and all of that, and processing emotions and talking about feelings. This is an extreme test of mental fortitude for these women, and men, of course. So she was at Auschwitz, I said, from 1943 until around January of 1945, when the Nazis were, I think, a little bit nervous that the Americans and the British were getting close and were catching on to them. And so she was transported from Auschwitz to Ravensbruk, and Ravensbruk is where they were doing a lot of medical testing on women. And I think she was only there for a couple weeks, months, before realizing, like, this is a horrible, horrible place, and anything I can do to like get on the next train out of here. Because I think at this point the Nazis were like, oh crap, we're going down, and we have to kind of move people around and destroy this camp and move on to the next. And so she went from Ravensbruk to Bergen Belsen, and Bergen Belsen is where she was liberated in April 1945. So April 15th, 1945. Which I am super excited that this April I will be with my family in Oxford, England, which I will explain how that ties in to all of this. But this is another really key point that I think helps the students to kind of picture what this was like. I explain how when the British soldiers liberated them in April 1945, soon, a couple of days, weeks after, a bunch of prisoners started to die. And she remembers feeling immense joy upon seeing the Jeep trucks roll in and being so confused and not really knowing what was going on, and being like, we can't possibly be free. And then being like, oh my gosh, we are free. This is incredible. And the British soldiers were like, okay, you know, you can go home now, you know, okay. And it's like, where are we going? And so they're giving them cigarettes, they're giving them candy, they're giving them chocolate and food. And so I asked the students why you think they died. Actually, last week, a student got it right, which was overconsumption. And they hadn't been used to eating such rich foods, such as the things that they were being given and the portions. And so a lot of people died. Thankfully, my great grandmother, you know, survived the war, survived this time. And upon the British soldiers liberating them, she goes up to every family member, sorry. She's trying to conjure her mind for like a family member who is who is possibly alive, who's not dead, who she can, you know, connect with, because it's like, okay, the war's over. What's home? Where am I going? Is my home my home? Have the German, the Nazis taken over? Have our Polish neighbors taken our home? What's left? So This is where we talk about the importance of thank you notes. So she had memorized her Uncle Bill's address in Houston. He had moved before the war to Houston, and his address was P.O. Box 1010, Houston, Texas. So she went up to every soldier that she could find and say, can you please write to my family in Texas and tell them I'm alive, and gave them the address. And so that ties into the trip to England. They recently found the letters between this soldier and found his name, his identity, his story. His name is Arthur Tyler. And Arthur Tyler wrote, she said, I went up to everyone, but you're the only one who actually wrote, and wrote to her Uncle Bill. And then, her sister, so I mentioned, remember, she had 2 older siblings, and her brother was at the camps with her, because he was the doctor in Warsaw, and the wife, who was the hygienist, who passed away because she couldn't go to work. And then on the other side, her other sibling was her older sister, who was off in France getting her degree, her master's degree, I believe, in French. So she kind of is not in concentration camps during the war. She is in France and then in the United States. And so she is, I believe, in Texas at this time. And so she helps get her sister back to the United States. But these letters of this realization that she's alive have just been discovered by someone in England. And I'm so excited I don't want to spoil it for myself. I'm waiting until we go on the trip to see what all is in the letters. I did see one. It's just so interesting the way people spoke. It was I won't rest until Naomi is back with me. I'm overjoyed that she is alive. And just really, really beautiful. And as someone with sisters, I cannot imagine how her sister felt discovering that her younger sister of, 8-10 years, was alive. And I also completely forgot to mention that at the beginning of the war, I said that her father had a little bit of status being the president of the bank, but then he had the microscope on him because he was a capitalist. So he was actually sent to a labor camp, a work camp in Siberia before they were sent to concentration camps. So they knew that he was in Siberia. He survives and he makes it back to the United States. And he lives to meet my mother. And so thankfully a good amount of people do survive. Her mother passes away. Her first husband, who I mentioned, who was in medical school, the doctor Alexander, he passes away. So here's some letters. And this is her sister, who was studying French. This is her husband, Sylvan, and he was fighting for the US, and he goes to I don't know where her DP camp was, in Poland. Yeah, Poland, I guess. Yeah. And once they find out that she's alive, he goes and locates her. So here's a photo after the war of my Nunu with her sister's husband. And then she makes her way on, the ship was called the SS John Merrick, out of Paris, I believe, to Ellis Island. And she comes to the United States. And she meets a man in Chicago, Martin, and here's a photo of them. I don't know if that's on their wedding day. It might be. She looks so beautiful and happy. And he's also a Holocaust survivor. And they meet and they have 3 children. And so the oldest is my grandmother, Helen, and then her twin siblings, Benjamin and Jerry. And so they, there's the 3 young kids. And also forgot to mention that at this time, a lot of people were told, women who survived this, don't get pregnant. You lost your period. You had immense damage done to your body during the war. And the fact that she was able to get pregnant and carry twins to term is incredible. So she has 3 children. Sadly, her husband passes away. Martin passes away. And she has 3 young kids. But before he passes away, they start a business importing meat. And so she got into the food business. And after he passes away, she has to run the company. She becomes CEO and runs the company as a single mother with 3 young children. And talk about, mental strength and fortitude, being a woman CEO in the 50s and 60s and 70s and all of these years, having kids, having two husbands who have passed away, one during the war and one after the war. I mean, having just so much trauma. Obviously, it wasn't like, let's go to therapy and talk about our feelings every week, which I'm a big fan of. You should all go to therapy. But something that I just can't imagine. And I get asked the question by students, you know, did she talk about this with you growing up? And she did talk about this with us growing up. And I think that's so different from my mother and her mother's generation. You know, in this age when she has 3 young kids, is running a business, like she's not talking about her past trauma. She's not talking about the war. It's like, you know, I gotta survive. I gotta start my business. I have to provide for my family. And I just can't imagine. But it wasn't something that was super talked about until, from what I think my mother has told me, until my mother and her brother Matt were asking questions. So as the grandkids came around, and obviously I'm a great-granddaughter. So by that time, everyone was it was very out in the open, talked about, and it's always been a part of my life. And so here is a photo from the Holocaust Museum in Houston. It's one of my favorite visuals in this whole presentation. It's of butterflies, which is kind of a symbol of the Holocaust. And she and some other survivors, you know, found each other and started talking about things, and were very big supporters and starters of the Holocaust Museum in Houston. And Houston has, you know, obviously a dwindling survivor base now, but, you know, a lot of survivors at the time. And she helped really build this place, and education and talking to students was such a big part of her life as a retired woman. And I remember, I have a lot of high school friends on, thank you for coming. And I remember they told me that she came to our Girl Scouts. I have a terrible memory. They're like, I remember her. She came to our Girl Scout meeting and talked about her life story. I don't exactly honestly know what she would have shared with us as like 10-year-olds about the Holocaust, but, and honestly, maybe my friends can put it in the chat, you know, what they remember from that, if anything. But such a beautiful piece of art that just helps me remember how she shared her story with so many. And I'm so proud that I can share her story now. And this is a photo when she went back in 2001. So I was a little baby. And this is, you know, the extended family, and obviously my Nunu in the middle, my grandmother on the left, and my Uncle Benjamin on the right, my parents, my aunt and uncle. So my grandfather, everyone's in this photo, and they all went back together. And she recalls, you know, being so proud and saying, you tried to kill me, but look how many people I brought back. All of these people are here because I survived. And it's just such a beautiful photo, a beautiful, beautiful photo. And honestly, I'm so jealous of that trip and being able to go with her. Obviously, I was 1 year old, so it wasn't going to be my trip, but it's just so amazing. And I wish I had the opportunity to go with her. But and I tell the kids, they probably think it's a peace sign, but it's a V for victory. And she said, I survived, I'm the victor. And here is a photo of her lovely 95th birthday party with my mom, and then my grandmother and grandfather. And so this is, you know, this is my family, and this is what the legacy she built. And we're so proud to be telling this story. My mom is going to be the incoming board chair of the Holocaust Museum in Houston. And I know my great grandmother is so proud of her, and Holocaust education is really so important to us. And I'm so glad I was able to share her story today. There were definitely, you know, some details that I probably left out, or you probably have some questions. So I would love to answer any questions that you have. I really appreciate you taking the time and being here this evening. It really means a lot to me and my family. So thank you.
Aerin, thank you for gifting us with your family's story. You did an amazing job. And what a beautiful anecdote about the exhibit. I can't wait to hear about it when you come back. We're now going to open it up for some questions. As a reminder, if you have any questions for Aerin, please type it into the Q&A box that's at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to address it. If we don't get to your question, you can email events@3gnewyork.org, and we'll get back to you later on. So Aerin, to start, I'd love to hear about how did the students respond when you share your story with them? I know that you gave some anecdotes about how they respond to your questions, which I think is so great that you're so engaging with them, but after you finish, do they have any responses?
They do. The first time I presented, I got a lot of handwritten letters that the teacher scanned to me, and that was the most special thing. But something that kept coming up over and over again was, I didn't realize how big of a problem this was. I didn't realize how big the Holocaust was, or I didn't know anything about the Holocaust. And these are 10th and 11th grade students who, I mean, obviously I'm in a very different position. This is something that I have never not known, and it's something so prevalent and relevant in my life. But to hear how people just had genuinely no concept of the scope and size of this, I mean, that really touches me and makes me so proud of the work that I'm doing and that, you know, we're all doing, because it's clearly something that they have no idea. And then sometimes they'll there's some more random questions here and there, and sometimes they're like, oh, well, what happened to so and so, because sometimes I forget a character in the story and I forget to weave it all the way through. So sometimes they ask that, and sometimes they also ask if, you know, there are any resources to continue learning and for like books that we recommend. And so, you know, 3GNY has a whole host of things to educate as well. I see a question that says, is Nunu still alive? I assume not. I'm sorry, I didn't get that part of the story. She unfortunately passed away in 2016, but it really wasn't unfortunate. She lived an amazing life until 96 years old, and she passed peacefully with all of our family there on either Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. So we were all together, and it was so beautiful. And yeah, so she did pass. I also see someone asking about this necklace, and this is a necklace that you might have seen in a couple of photos at the end, is a family necklace that the women in our family all have, and it's so special. And I was telling Elliot and Alyssa that I was like trying to get the clasp on. I was like, I have to wear my necklace. This necklace means so much to me. This is also actually her sweater. She was the most stylish woman ever. And who else can say that they currently in 2024 are wearing their great-grandmother's clothing? Probably very few of you. So she still is with me, literally on my body today.
That's amazing. And yeah, to your earlier point, I think so much of us grow up knowing our grandparents or great-grandparents' story, that we almost take it for granted, which might not be the best word to use, but I think it just proves how important our work is, because we don't realize how many people don't actually know much, if anything, about the Holocaust.
I see someone said that Maccabi games are in Houston and Detroit this year, and I wonder if we could take them to the museum. I know that they're in Houston. I actually know that someone who's very involved with Maccabi in Houston should be on this evening. So I'll definitely follow up on that. And also my mom, who's going to be board chair, but that would be really awesome. I don't know much about how Maccabi works with like time for the kids when they're not playing sports and doing, for those who don't know, Maccabi is like a athletic games event for young Jewish kids. So you like travel and it's during the summer. So, but that would be a really great idea. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Aerin. Amazing presentation. I mean, your passion, your knowledge is really just so impressive. I guess the question I want to ask is, if your Nunu was still alive, how would she feel about you doing this work?
I think she'd be delighted. I think she'd like honestly want to sit in the back corner and listen and come with me. She was so infectious. She was so genuine. And as I said, I knew her for 16 years of my life. I remember so distinctly some of my like last memories with her were, I think it was my sophomore year of high school. And I had the last period of the day off. So I had like the last 2 hours when we like block scheduling on like Thursdays. And so every Thursday, I think I got off at like 2 and we'd go for a late lunch at Kenny and Ziggy's, the Jewish deli. in Houston and just talk about life, eat good food. And I think she would be so, so proud, because I know that was something we talked about how education is, she was the biggest proponent of education. She also really loved paying taxes because she was like, this means that like, I've made it. And so this year my parents were reminding me how blessed I am to pay my taxes. But, she really, after living what she lived through, like she did not sweat the small stuff and, looked at the world in a extremely positive way for someone who had been through such horror, and education was such a big part of her life in the end, and educating students on what had happened. And so I think that she would be so proud, which makes me very happy.
That's beautiful. Thanks, Aerin. We have another question. When Nunu was being deported to Auschwitz, did she know that she was going to a camp, or were they unsure?
I don't 100% know the answer. I would assume they had some idea that like, because there was probably chatter and talk, and I'm sure there was, rounds of people who went before and people after and things of that nature. A random anecdote that I will note. So I had the privilege of going, my temple in Houston, Emmanuel, takes all of the confirmation graduates on a trip to Poland and Israel, paid for, which was an amazing blessing. And I was able to go with my confirmation class. So my friends who I grew up with going to Hebrew school, who, had that connection and knew my family and I knew theirs, we all went to Poland together. And I remember being so shocked when they were like, okay, we're going to get up in the morning and we're going to Auschwitz, and being like, okay, like assuming it was going to be like a really far drive because, how could something so horrible be so close to like a city and like a town and people, and then getting on the bus and 20 minutes later being right there. And so my point in that is that like I don't know if she knew, but like there were people so close by to the horror that was happening, and smelling, dead bodies burning and seeing what was going on. There had to have been some semblance of an idea, but I don't know that she knew where she was going and how long it would take and all of that.
Yeah, that makes
Thanks,
sense.
Speaking of Houston, you said Houston became somewhat of a hub for survivors. Do you have any idea why that's the case or what drew them there?
I don't, and I'm not 100% sure. I know that, for those who are New Yorkers, or not from the Houston area, a lot of people are like, Houston, that's so random, of a city, but it's not. It's the 4th largest city in the United States, and there's a really beautiful, large, thriving Jewish community. All of that being said, that, it's just a major city like New York, LA, Chicago, which also have a lot of Jewish people. So I don't exactly know. I don't really actually know how my Uncle Bill, her Uncle Bill, who she wrote the letter to, how he ended up in Houston. Not really sure before the war. So I don't know the answer to that. I can, phone a friend. Maybe if a family member has a thought on that, we can get back to you.
Great. So I know besides her fashion and being able to wear her clothes, were there any other family traditions that she continued from her life before the war? Or do you know of any favorite family traditions?
That's a good question of things that happened before the war that she carried on. I don't know the answer. I know that her brother survived. I know that her father survived. I know that she had family afterwards. And so hopefully that lessened her burden on feeling like she had to be, the only one who survived. And as I also mentioned, her sister, who didn't go to a concentration or labor camp, also survived. So I think there was a lot of people in her life. And so I don't know the answer to that, but I will say, my mom put something in the open thing, so I'm just going to answer her point while I'm here, that back to education being so important and keeping her family legacy alive. It's a tradition now of our family. So I don't know, this obviously wasn't a tradition of her family back in Poland before the war, but a tradition of our family now is getting together for the Warren Fellows. So for one of her birthdays, the family decided that, she doesn't want any birthday presents, so we're going to endow a fellowship in her name and bring students from, I actually don't think you know this, Alyssa, bring students from the Syracuse area. Dave might be familiar with this, as Dave, the leader, is in Syracuse. And then also people from the Texas area who are people who are getting either undergrad or masters in education in any field. They can want to be music teachers, be math teachers, but teaching the lessons of the Holocaust to students in the classroom. And so it's like, 30 people who will come twice a year to the Holocaust Museum in Houston. They'll experience Houston. They'll be speakers. They'll be in the museum, all sorts of events, and they'll be virtual speakers and people in person and educators throughout the city and the country who will fly in for this event each year. And it's a really beautiful time for all of us to get together as a family, because we go and meet all of the Warren Fellows. She was there every day when she was alive for the Warren Fellows. And there's still a really tight-knit community of fellows across the country. And I remember when she passed away in 2016, I mean, the amount of flowers and letters and stories we heard from these Warren Fellows about their time meeting Nunu was incredible. And it's something that still continues today, even when she's not here. And so it's so important for our family to show up. And that's a big family tradition that we all, go to an event, and then we'll go out with all of the fellows for a dinner and really get to share her story and the personal connection with them. And as I said, these are like people who could be teaching social studies and English, but they could also literally be teaching music. And it's any educator who wants to be able to incorporate this into their classroom.
Wow, what a beautiful legacy. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's so special that you're a 4G. And that's one of the questions we have in the chat is, have you found a community of 4G in Houston or really elsewhere? Or do you find that the majority of people involved in this work are 3G?
So being just like the way the generations worked, like most of the people who I meet at 3G events in New York, they're like, you're a 4G? Like, my kids are 4G. And I'm like, oh, how old are your kids? And they're like 7. I'm like, oh, cool. And they're telling me about, elementary schools in New York. I'm like, oh, totally. I have no idea. So I don't really have a lot of 4G connections yet. I can be the leader for these young 4Gs, but they have to be able to read and write. So we'll get there. But I definitely feel I'm on the younger 3G. But Alyssa and I aren't too far apart in age.
I think that's what's beautiful about 3GNY too, is it's, we do the intergenerational brunch. We do a lot of things that span generations, that there's a way to form community across all types of descendants too.
Totally.
I think we probably have time for one more question. So it seems like you know a lot about your Nunu story. How did you piece this information together? Did 3G help you assemble this story to share, or did you have a lot of the information already?
It's a great question. So a lot of people, so Alyssa and I were actually in the same training program, and I felt like I came into the program and they were like, okay, the first week is going to be researching your family's story and, collecting photos and talking to family members and kind of like doing that like first initial dig. And to me, I was like, that's so, I mean, to have that experience for the first time must be so emotional. And it was really awesome to see my fellow training members going through that process. I didn't feel I wasn't in that same place at the beginning, because I did have 16. I mean, as I said, I'm 23 at the time. I was 22. And so I 16 years of my 22, like most of my life, she was alive and I knew her. And so I have so many photos of her. We have such detailed accounts of her life. She has recorded testimony. There's a lovely YouTube video about her life that I can include in the follow-up of this. But point being, I think 3G, this program, helped me piece together. I mean, as I said, I knew so much. And so it's like, okay, how do I condense that down into 25, 30 minutes for a classroom setting? What's appropriate? What's going to resonate? What makes sense? What's not too I don't want to horrify the crap out of the students, but also I want to be real. But then also show them her life after the war and how she thrived and how education was so important. And so I think that's where 3G helped me in my storytelling abilities. Yeah.
That's great. Well, Aerin, again, thank you so much for speaking tonight and for sharing your great-grandmother's story. We're grateful to have you involved with 3GNY. And thank you, Elliot, for being an important part of this program. Thanks again to all of you for joining us. We're glad that you took the time to hear Aerin speak words that must never be forgotten. If you haven't yet made a gift to support our educational programs, we hope you'll consider making one now. Please refer to the chat for ways you can donate. Thank you. And for those of you in the New York area, please consider joining us for a very special evening on April 4th for Invited to Life, Finding Hope After the Holocaust, which is a conversation with 2 Holocaust survivors and the photojournalist B.A. Van Cise. A link with more info is in the chat as well. Also, if you have connections with educators who may want our speakers to present to their classes, please let us know. We have a large speaker bureau of hundreds of grandchildren prepared and ready to present, just like you saw Aerin do tonight. We'll send out an email in the coming days with more information, as well as a recording of tonight's program. You can also check out our past WEDU Wednesday speakers and other events on 3GNY's YouTube channel. Thanks again for taking the time out of your evening to be with us. We are grateful, as always, for your presence and support. Thank you.